I first noticed the anomaly on an otherwise uneventful afternoon in London, standing before the cast-iron lamppost anchored at the corner of Farringdon Street and Stonecutter Street. According to city records, the lamp had been installed in 1871, part of the post-Great Fire modernisation programme. I expected nothing beyond typical Victorian ironwork, but while reviewing a March 1872 installation photograph from the Metropolitan Board of Works, I noticed a detail that resisted quick explanation. The lamp's base was sealed, smooth, continuous, unbroken. No feed pipe, no inlet, no service hatch. Victorian gas infrastructure was never this pristine. An engineering note from the same year dismissed similar anomalies as decorative simplifications, yet something about the machining precision, too exact for the period, pulled at me. Late at night, under the muted desk light of my study, I compared this lamp to diagrams that certain fringe researchers classify as Tartarian infrastructure remnants. The symmetry was identical. I closed the photograph, unsettled, and opened the next folder. City records indicate that the Farringdon Street lamp was fabricated in 1870 by Grantham & Sons Ironworks, a firm known for routine municipal commissions throughout the London metropolitan area. Its blueprint, filed in Volume 3 of the Public Lighting Register, maintained by the Metropolitan Board of Works, depicts a standard hollow cast-iron column intended to receive a 3/4-inch gas feed running from the underground main through a concealed channel in the base. The design was straightforward, expected, entirely consistent with the hundreds of similar lamps installed across London during that decade of rapid urban expansion. But when I visited the site at dawn, measuring calipers in hand, the base presented a different story entirely. What I found was a solid cast plinth, seamless, fused, with no evidence of retrofit patching or any modification whatsoever. The archival photograph from 1872 showed the same detail with uncomfortable clarity. Either Grantham & Sons forgot to include a feed line, an impossibility for any functioning gas lamp, a mistake that would have rendered the entire fixture useless, or the lamp never required one in the first place. I knelt on the pavement and ran my fingers along the base, searching for any seam, any joint, any indication of where a pipe might once have entered. There was nothing. The iron was continuous, as though cast in a single pour around a solid core. A maintenance log from 1894, which I located in the London Metropolitan Archives after 3 days of searching, refers cryptically to lamps of anomalous type requiring no scheduled line desuiting. The phrasing struck me as peculiar. Desuiting was essential maintenance for any gas lamp. The accumulation of carbon residue would eventually block the gas flow entirely. A lamp requiring no desuiting was a lamp that did not burn gas. The phrase echoes terminology I had encountered in speculative forums discussing what researchers call Tartarian self-contained luminance systems, though I hesitated to make that connection explicit even in my own notes. I photographed every angle of the base, measured its circumference 3 times with different instruments, documented the texture of the iron surface under magnification. The machining marks were too regular, too precise for Victorian-era casting techniques. The tolerances were measured in fractions of millimeters, accuracy that period foundries could not reliably achieve. The official explanation, when I finally located one, in a 1923 municipal engineering survey, labels this lamp a design oddity of no particular significance. Yet oddities rarely repeat themselves with such precision. And this, I would soon discover, was only the first of many. Why would a lamp built for gas lack the one feature that made it functional? 3 weeks into my research, I travelled north to Manchester by rail, carrying a leather case filled with photographic reproductions and measurement notes. A similar lamppost stands along Deansgate, near the junction with St. Hall Mary's Gate, installed in 1872, during the expansion of the commercial district that followed the completion of the Manchester Ship Canal feasibility studies. The lamp occupies a prominent corner position, visible from multiple approach streets, a placement that suggested civic pride rather than mere utility. According to architect Sir James Lacey's 1873 Urban Infrastructure Report, commissioned by the Manchester Corporation, the Deansgate lamps were fueled via underground cast-iron mains laid during the same construction phase. The report includes detailed specifications for pipe diameters, junction boxes, and maintenance access points. Everything appears thoroughly documented, professionally executed. Yet the original installation photograph in Manchester Civic Archive, catalogued as photograph number W11, shows, again, no feed line entering the lamp base. The photograph was taken on the day of the lamp's ceremonial lighting, and it captures the base in sharp detail from an angle that should clearly show the pipe junction. There is nothing there. I obtained permission to examine the physical lamp during a quiet Sunday morning when foot traffic was minimal. The base geometry matched the London lamp within 1 millimeter across every measurement I took. The fluting pattern was identical, 12 flutes, each 47 millimeters wide at the base, tapering to 31 millimeters at the shoulder. The curvature of the decorative cap followed the same radius. Even the proportion of the lantern housing to the column height matched precisely. This degree of similarity matched templates I had seen only in fringe discussions of Tartarian standardization aesthetics, the theory that certain architectural and infrastructural elements across Europe share common design origins predating the civilizations that claimed to build them. I dismissed the idea as speculation, but the identical measurements troubled me deeply. Victorian municipalities rarely shared tooling molds, particularly between competing industrial regions. Manchester and London maintained separate foundry contracts, separate engineering standards, separate supply chains, and indeed a considerable civic rivalry. A brief renovation order from 1909, which I discovered in a box of uncatalogued municipal documents, instructed workers to remove internal apparatus of unknown purpose from the Deansgate lamp. The order specified that the removed components should be transported to a municipal storage facility for examination, but no record of that examination survives. No sketches of the apparatus were made. No description of its function was recorded. The order was signed by a junior municipal clerk named Edwin Hartley, whose name appears nowhere else in Manchester City records, not in employment rolls, not in census data, not in any other official document. Two cities separated by 200 miles. Two supposedly independent manufacturers working from separate contracts. Identical lamps down to the millimeter. The coincidence strained credulity past its breaking point. Why would two cities fabricate identical lamps using different manufacturers? Back in London, I spent 4 days in the Guildhall Library examining engineering drawings from the 1860s and 1870s. The collection is extensive but poorly indexed, and I worked through dozens of irrelevant documents before locating the relevant files. A complete set of lamp specifications dated 1869 clearly shows a hollow shaft intended for pipe access, with detailed cross-sections indicating wall thickness, internal diameter, and the precise location where the gas feed should enter. But the physical lamp standing at Farringdon Street is undeniably solid. I had measured it myself. The blueprint and the reality did not match. When I overlaid the blueprint on a scaled photograph using transparent paper and careful alignment of reference points, the misalignment was too consistent to ignore. This was not a case of minor manufacturing variation or accumulated wear. The blueprint depicted a fundamentally different internal structure than what was actually built. The drawing showed a hollow column with a 38mm internal channel. The physical lamp contained a reinforced central core that left no room for any channel at all. The lamp's real geometry, solid, dense, precisely machined, was inconsistent with gas-fed infrastructure. Yet it was strikingly reminiscent of vertical conduits mentioned in 1812 St. Petersburg municipal diagrams, documents I had encountered only in obscure academic references and occasionally cited by Tartarian theorists as evidence of a pre-industrial energy distribution grid. Those Russian diagrams showed similar solid core columns with identical external proportions, installed decades before gaslighting became practical. A short notation scribbled in the margin of a later copy of the London blueprint, possibly added by a municipal engineer during a review in the 1880s, reads, "Model differs from execution. Use as installed." The handwriting is cramped, hurried, almost furtive. Simple words, but an admission of considerable significance. Someone had noticed the discrepancy and chosen to ignore it. More than that, they had instructed others to ignore it as well. Victorian builders were meticulous record keepers. Engineering deviations of this magnitude, a completely different internal structure than specified, would normally trigger extensive documentation, formal inquiries, possibly even contract disputes. Yet here the record simply stopped. The blueprint showed one thing, the lamp showed another. The marginal note acknowledged the contradiction and then dismissed it. No surviving document explains why the lamp was built differently than designed, or who authorized the change, or what purpose the solid core was meant to serve. Why preserve a blueprint for a lamp that was never constructed as drawn? There was nothing extraordinary about a lamp until it contradicted its own blueprint. And blueprints, unlike photographs, do not lie casually. They represent intention, specification, contractual obligation. When a blueprint and its supposed product diverge so completely, something has been concealed. The investigation required me to look beneath the surface, literally. While reviewing subterranean surveys for the Holborn Viaduct District at the London Metropolitan Archives, I noted a 1924 utilities excavation map that showed something unexpected. The gas mains in the area, clearly marked in red ink, bypassed the Farringdon lamp entirely. They ran along the opposite side of the street, then turned away at the intersection where the lamp stood. A dotted annotation on the map marked the lamp location with two words: solid obstruction, not junction, not access point, not even unknown obstruction. The excavation log accompanying the map, written by a surveyor named Harold Whitmore, notes that workers encountered a vertical metallic cylinder extending deeper than expected foundation depth. Standard lamp foundations of the period extended perhaps 2 feet below street level. This cylinder descended at least 8 feet, possibly more. The workers stopped digging when they realized they could not reach the bottom without compromising the structural integrity of the surrounding pavement. The cylinder was not part of the city gas system. It was not connected to any known utility. It was simply there, buried beneath a lamp that supposedly functioned on gas it could not possibly have received. A machinist on Whitmore's crew made a field sketch of what they uncovered before refilling the excavation. The sketch depicts a nested core, 3 concentric sleeves of unknown alloy, each separated by a gap of approximately 5 millimeters. The innermost sleeve displays radial scoring reminiscent of hydraulic buffering chambers in early industrial machinery, the kind of precision machining used to regulate pressure in steam systems. But the date of the lamp's supposed construction, 1871, predates any known municipal application of such technology by at least 30 years. The mechanisms shown in the sketch should not have existed in the 1870s. They should not have been buried beneath a gas lamp. They should not have been forgotten. Alternative researchers sometimes describe similar multi-sleeved designs as remnants of Tartarian pressure regulation conduits, components of a hypothesized energy distribution network that predated modern utilities. I still resisted the interpretation, still filed it mentally under speculation and wishful thinking. But the geometry in Whitmore's sketch was an undeniable match to diagrams I had encountered in engineering journals from the 1810s, journals published before the systems they seemed to describe had supposedly been invented. The excavation team in 1924 filled the hole with concrete and moved on. Their final report noted only that the obstruction was of unusual construction and required no further investigation. No samples were taken, no photographs were made. No one asked what the cylinder was for. Why bury a mechanism deeper than the lamp itself? In Paris, I spent 2 weeks examining lighting fixtures installed along Boulevard Voltaire in 1865, part of Baron Georges Eugène Haussmann's comprehensive modernization program that transformed the medieval city into the broad-avenued metropolis we know today. Haussmann's renovations are well documented, perhaps the most thoroughly documented urban reconstruction project of the 19th century. Every street widening, every building demolition, every new utility installation was recorded in exhaustive detail. A photograph from 1866, archived at the Bibliothèque Nationale de France under catalogue number PHO 1866847, shows a lamp whose base uses the same 12-flute pattern found in London and Manchester. The proportions are identical, the decorative elements are identical, the lantern housing follows the same curve, different nations with different industrial traditions, different foundries with different tooling, different political eras with different administrative structures, but identical design signatures replicated with precision that suggests not coincidence but coordination. Haussmann's records cite the manufacturer as Colin et Compagnie, a Parisian metalworks firm that produced fixtures for many of the new boulevards. Unlike the British examples, the Parisian blueprints have survived intact in the municipal archives, detailed drawings showing every dimension, every component, every assembly step. The blueprints show a hollow core designed to receive a gas feed from the newly installed underground mains. Yet physical inspection of an unrestored lamp in the 11th arrondissement, one of the few that escaped the various renovation campaigns of the 20th century, revealed the same anomalously solid plinth I had measured in London and Manchester. The theoretical gas channels shown in the blueprints simply did not exist in the physical structure. The lamp was solid iron where it should have been hollow. A renovation memo from 1903, located in the Archives de Paris after considerable difficulty, states, "Base structure atypical, contains non-functional void or sealed cavity, and not to be disturbed. Not functional yet not empty. Sealed, preserved, protected from investigation." The memo offered no explanation for why a non-functional cavity warranted protection rather than removal. Standard renovation practice would have been to fill any void with concrete for structural stability. Instead, workers were explicitly instructed to leave it alone. Some fringe researchers attribute this pattern to what they call pan-Tartarian infrastructural inheritance, the theory that certain civic structures across Europe were not built by the engineers who claimed credit for them, but inherited from an earlier, now erased civilization and merely adapted for new purposes. I did not adopt their terminology in my notes. The recurrence of identical anomalies across cities that should have had no connection, that maintained separate engineering traditions and competing industrial interests, unsettled me more than I wanted to admit. How did identical lamp bases appear in British and French systems despite independent fabrication? St. Petersburg holds one of the most disputed sets of historical maps in any European archive. 18th century atlases in the collection of the Russian Academy of Sciences include maps labeled Great Tartary, vast territories spanning much of northern Asia, marked as a distinct civilization with its own cities, its own infrastructure, its own political organization. Modern historians dismiss these labels as cartographic convention, placeholder names for poorly understood regions. Alternative researchers see something else entirely. My visit to the Academy's archive aimed only to confirm map labelling practices, to understand how cartographers of the 1700s categorized territories beyond European control. I was not looking for evidence to support speculative theories. I was trying to understand a naming convention. Yet inside a bound volume of city engineering schematics covering the years 1801 to 1814, I found something I had not expected. A diagram on page 247 marked lighting column, type saw, showed a profile I recognized immediately. The same fluting pattern, the same lantern cap proportions, the same solid plinth geometry I had measured in London, Manchester and Paris. This diagram predates the British and French lamps by over half a century. It predates the widespread adoption of gas lighting anywhere in Europe. It predates the supposed invention of the technologies it depicts. An engineering journal entry from 1810, translated for me by an Academy archivist named Dmitry Volkov, who seemed puzzled by my interest, states, "Vertical column contains conduit of unknown origin, builders instructed to leave core untouched during foundation work." The entry describes workers installing new paving stones around an existing column, not building a new one, but working around something that was already there. The column predated the 1810 construction project. How far it predated that project, the journal does not say. This entry was written before any recorded Russian gas lighting system. The technology to fuel such lamps through conventional means did not officially exist in St. Petersburg in 1810, yet the lamps were already standing, already integrated into the urban landscape, already old enough that no one remembered who had built them or why. Tartarian theorists claim these early columns were part of an inherited infrastructure predating modern utility networks, remnants of a sophisticated civilization deliberately erased from official history through centuries of selective documentation and strategic destruction. I categorized this hypothesis as speculative, as I always had. But the chronology was increasingly resistant to simple explanation. The evidence did not fit the timeline I had been taught. Why does the earliest version of the lamp appear long before the invention of public gas infrastructure? I needed physical evidence, something beyond photographs and blueprints and half-legible archival entries. And the opportunity came when a restoration project in the 11th arrondissement of Paris generated debris from a damaged lamp base. Through a contact at the École des Mines, I obtained core samples from the fractured iron. The analysis took 3 weeks. When the results arrived, I read them twice before accepting what they showed. The metal composition was inconsistent with standard 19th century cast iron. The sample showed manganese levels too refined for mid-1800s smelting technology, more aligned with metallurgical techniques developed in the early 20th century. The carbon distribution was unusually uniform, suggesting controlled cooling processes that Victorian foundries could not have achieved with their equipment. The grain structure indicated the metal had been processed at temperatures higher than period furnaces could reliably maintain. The interior surface of the sample, from the wall of the supposed gas channel, displayed scoring patterns that made no sense for a lighting fixture. The marks were consistent with pressure cycling, the kind of wear produced when a surface is repeatedly subjected to hydraulic or pneumatic force. The scoring radiated outward in a spiral pattern suggesting rotation under load. Hydraulic chambers in lampposts make no engineering sense within the conventional historical framework. Lampposts illuminate streets. They do not regulate pressure. They do not contain rotating components. They do not require materials engineered to withstand repeated stress cycles. Unless the lamp originally served a different purpose entirely. I consulted with a materials engineer at Imperial College London who specializes in Victorian-era metallurgy. She examined my samples with obvious skepticism, then examined them again with obvious confusion. Her conclusion was carefully worded. The alloy composition was anomalous, inconsistent with documented manufacturing practices of the period. She offered no explanation and asked that I not quote her by name. This physical evidence aligns uncomfortably with fringe interpretations of Tartarian infrastructure as multifunctional systems, not merely illumination, but hydraulic regulation, atmospheric energy capture, purposes we no longer understand because we no longer possess the knowledge to recognize them. The theories sound fantastical when stated plainly. Yet the physical evidence, the metallurgy, the machining, the wear patterns, required a different explanatory framework than Victorian gas engineering could provide. The lamp was not merely decorative. It was not merely functional in any sense we currently understand. It was engineered for something. What hydraulic forces would a lamppost ever need to withstand? While cross-referencing renovation records from multiple European cities, I discovered a pattern too consistent to attribute to coincidence or independent decision-making. Between 1905 and 1935, municipal authorities across the continent ordered the removal of internal apparatus from thousands of antique lampposts. The orders used nearly identical language despite originating from different governments, different administrative traditions, different languages. A Berlin municipal record from 1912, located in the Landesarchiv, instructs workers to extract and dispose of interior mechanisms of obsolete design from lampposts in the Mitte district. The order specifies that removed components should be melted down for scrap recovery, with no documentation of their original configuration required. A Vienna document from 1919 found in the Wiener Stadt- und Landesarchiv refers to clearing internal components no longer serviceable from fixtures along the Ringstrasse. The order emphasizes speed. The work should be completed before the following month's municipal inspection. A Brussels memo from 1923, preserved in the Archives de la Vie, orders removal of non-standard internal fittings from lampposts in the European quarter. The memo notes that workers should not attempt to understand or document the removed components, only to ensure their complete extraction. None of these documents describe what was removed, none include diagrams or photographs, none explain why the components were deemed obsolete or non-standard, terms that imply comparison to some standard that itself goes unspecified. None record where the extracted materials ultimately went. The systematic nature of these removals suggests coordination at a level that should not have existed. In 1912, Berlin and Vienna were rival capitals of competing empires. Brussels operated under a different political system entirely. These cities had no mechanism for coordinating municipal maintenance policies, no reason to use identical language in internal documents, no shared interest in treating lamp components the same way. Unless the coordination predated the political divisions, unless someone, some entity, some institution understood what the lamps contained and decided across borders and across decades that those contents should not survive into the modern era. Tartarian researchers point to this pattern as evidence of deliberate erasure, the systematic destruction of inherited technology that could not be explained within the accepted historical narrative. I could not endorse the theory, but I could not explain the documentation gap through any conventional mechanism either. What was removed, and why did no one record it? Evidence accumulates quietly, almost reluctantly. A blueprint discrepancy becomes a cross-continental pattern. A sealed plinth becomes a recurring engineering feature. A gas lamp, that most mundane of urban fixtures, begins to look like anything but a gas lamp. Renovation logs from 1931 for the Farringdon district, which I obtained through a Freedom of Information request after the London Metropolitan Archives initially denied access, record the removal of internal assemblies of unknown purpose from 17 lampposts in the area. The logs are perfunctory, bureaucratic, clearly written by someone who considered the task routine. but one entry includes a detail the others lack. A worker named Thomas Brennan described the pieces he extracted as interlocking brass fins, arranged in a spiral formation around a central shaft. He noted that the fins were warm to the touch despite the lamp having been disconnected from any power source for 3 days. He noted that the spiral pattern reminded him of a turbine he had seen in a shipyard, though smaller and more precisely machined. No photographs survive of Brennan's discovery, no samples were preserved, but his marginal sketch, quick, rough, clearly drawn in the field, depicts something that resembles a rotary pressure modulation device. The design suggests rotation under pressure, energy conversion, mechanical work being performed by a system that supposedly did nothing but hold a glass lantern above the street. Modern engineers I consulted, 3 of them from different institutions, interviewed separately, insisted that such components did not belong in lighting systems. The fin geometry suggested fluid dynamics, possibly pneumatic or hydraulic function. The spiral arrangement implied rotation, possibly driven by pressure differentials. The brass composition suggested concerns about corrosion resistance, as though the component had been designed for long-term contact with moisture or reactive gases. None of this made sense for a gas lamp. All of it made sense for something else, something the engineers could not identify because it did not match any system currently in use. Fragments recovered from the Manchester lamp during a 2019 maintenance project exhibit shearing marks consistent with deliberate removal using period-appropriate tools. The breaks are clean, precise, located at structural weak points that suggest the person doing the removal knew exactly where to apply force. This was not decay or accidental damage. Someone had taken the lamp apart with skill and intention. These recurring sealed chambers echo diagrams in speculative Tartarian literature proposing vertical energy conduits embedded in civic structures throughout Europe and beyond. The theory posits that certain buildings, monuments, and infrastructure were not built by the civilizations that claimed credit for them, but inherited from an earlier, more technologically advanced society and repurposed, often incorrectly, for new functions. Although the theory remains unproven by conventional academic standards, the structural parallels between the literature and my physical observations were increasingly difficult to dismiss as coincidence or confirmation bias. Why were these unknown mechanisms systematically removed across the early 20th century? While comparing lantern housings across my growing collection of photographs and measurements, I noticed a geometric pattern I had initially overlooked. The curvature of the domed tops, the decorative caps that crowned each lamp, followed a mathematical relationship I recognized from architectural studies, the radius-to-height ratio repeated with uncanny consistency across every lamp I measured. 1:1618, the golden ratio. The same proportion appears in classical architecture, in Renaissance painting, in natural growth patterns. It is a ratio associated with aesthetic perfection, with deliberate design, with intention. Victorian decorative metalwork does not typically adhere to such strict geometrical coding. Industrial-era lamp designers prioritized function, cost, and manufacturing efficiency. They used simple ratios, 1:2, 2:3, that were easy to calculate and easy to verify during quality control. The golden ratio requires more precise tooling, more careful measurement, more expensive production processes. It offers no functional advantage for a gas lamp. Yet photographs of the 1866 Paris lamp, the 1871 London lamp, and the 1810 St. Petersburg type wharf column all reveal identical dome curvature when subjected to geometric analysis. I performed the measurements myself using high-resolution scans and digital overlay tools. The ratios matched within 0.3%, a margin of error smaller than the variation you would expect from different foundries using different equipment in different decades. Tartarian researchers have long pointed to the golden ratio as a signature of their hypothesized lost civilization, a mathematical fingerprint deliberately embedded in inherited structures, perhaps as a mark of origin, perhaps as a functional requirement we no longer understand. The theory sounds mystical when stated baldly, the kind of numerology that serious researchers dismiss. But the numbers were there. I measured them. They did not vary across nations, across decades, across supposedly independent manufacturing processes. Someone at some point had established a standard, and that standard had propagated across Europe without any documented mechanism for its transmission. The alternative explanation that Victorian engineers in London, Paris, and St. Petersburg independently chose to use the golden ratio for lamp dome proportions, achieving identical results through pure coincidence, strained probability past the breaking point. Who standardized a dome geometry across 3 nations and 7 decades? So the geometric patterns extended beyond individual lamps. While mapping historical lamp locations onto 19th century city plans, using period surveys and modern GIS software to establish precise coordinates, I observed alignment patterns that should not have existed. The lamps did not occupy random positions. They did not simply follow street layouts or respond to traffic patterns. They corresponded to radial lines converging towards specific points that, when I investigated further, turned out to be former star fort sites. Star forts, the distinctive star-shaped military fortifications that proliferated across Europe from the 16th through 19th centuries, are frequently cited in speculative Tartarian studies as evidence of a pre-existing urban grid. Theory suggests that star forts were not built by the military engineers who claimed credit for them but inherited from an earlier civilization and repurposed for defense. The theory is controversial, dismissed by mainstream historians, unsupported by conventional documentation. But the alignments were real. I measured them. In London, lamps along Farringdon Street align with the northern edge of the former Moorfields earthwork, an ancient defensive structure that predates clear historical records. The angular correspondence is accurate to within 0.4 degrees across a distance of nearly 2 kilometers. In Paris, the Boulevard Voltaire lamps follow a trajectory toward the demolished Bastille fortifications, which retained a partial star-shaped ground plan until their destruction during Haussmann's renovations. Again, the alignment holds to within half a degree. In St. Petersburg, the type of 4 columns documented in the 1810 Engineering Journal align with the radiating arms of the Admiralty's tri-spoked layout, a geometric pattern that Tartarian researchers identify as characteristic of inherited city design, though mainstream historians attribute it to Peter the Great's deliberate urban planning. Official planning documents do not record these alignments. No Victorian engineer noted that the lamps were being placed along geometric radials. No municipal authority documented a deliberate pattern. The alignments appear nowhere in the historical record. They are visible only when you plot the coordinates and look for them. Urban historians I consulted attributed such correspondences to topography and municipal convenience. Streets follow terrain, and lamps follow streets. But the precision of the angular correspondence resisted that explanation. Streets wander. They accommodate existing buildings, property lines, drainage patterns. They do not maintain half-degree accuracy over kilometers unless someone is deliberately maintaining it. Were the lamps installed to illuminate streets or to delineate an inherited geometric grid? Patterns no longer hide. They assert themselves through repetition. Identical geometry, identical alignments, identical removals. The lamps behave less like isolated Victorian artifacts and more like fragments of a larger system, a system whose purpose was forgotten, whose components were stripped, whose very existence was systematically obscured. After months of cross-comparing lamps, blueprints, excavation logs, metallurgical analyses, and international archives, a quiet recognition took shape in my study. It was not a revelation, nothing so dramatic. It was more like watching fog gradually lift from a landscape, revealing features that had always been there but could not previously be seen. The lamps form a network, but not a Victorian network. Their dates do not align with gas infrastructure development. The St. Petersburg columns predate European gas lighting by decades. The Paris lamps appeared before Haussmann's engineering innovations were implemented. The London fixtures contradicted their own engineering documents from the moment they were supposedly installed. Their construction does not align with 19th century metallurgy. The alloy compositions suggest techniques unavailable to Victorian foundries: manganese refinement, controlled cooling, uniform carbon distribution. The machining precision exceeds what period tools could reliably achieve. The tolerances are measured in fractions of millimeters in an era when quarter-inch accuracy was considered excellent work. Their internal components do not align with lighting technology. Hydraulic chambers, pressure-regulating fins, rotary mechanisms, nested sleeves extending deep into the earth. None of these serve illumination. None of these belong in a gas lamp. None of these appear in any engineering manual of the period. Alternative researchers would label this collection of evidence a Tartarian infrastructural remnant, a surviving skeleton of a forgotten system, adapted by later civilizations who did not understand its purpose, misidentified as their own creation, and eventually stripped of its functional components when those components could not be explained or maintained. I do not embrace the label with the certainty that some researchers bring to it. The evidence is suggestive, not conclusive. The documentation gaps could have innocent explanations I have not discovered. The patterns could be coincidences I am predisposed to see because I have been looking for them. But I acknowledge what the evidence suggests: a sophisticated design long predating the infrastructure it supposedly served, a system whose origins were forgotten before it was ever properly recorded, a technology that was inherited, adapted, misunderstood, and finally dismantled by people who could not comprehend what they were destroying. What if the gas lamps were not built to emit light, but to regulate something else entirely? In the quiet of my study, long after midnight, I returned to the original 1872 Farringdon Street photograph that had started this investigation. The image had become familiar over the months. I had examined it hundreds of times, enlarged every quadrant, noted every detail. But familiar is not the same as understood. I enlarged the photograph once more, pushing the resolution until the grain began to dissolve into individual silver halide particles, until the image became a texture of light and shadow more than a representation of objects. I was not looking for anything specific. I was looking at everything, hoping something would resolve into meaning. There, behind the lamppost, at the edge of the frame where the photographer had not intended to capture anything of significance, lay a small maintenance trench. The trench had been opened for some purpose related to the lamp's installation or inspection. Inside it, barely visible in the shadows, a metallic sleeve descended into the ground. The sleeve was thicker than any gas line of the period. It extended deeper than the trench itself, disappearing into darkness below the excavation floor. Its surface showed the same machining marks I had observed on the lamp samples, regular, precise, industrial, in a way that should not have been possible in 1872. No other photograph recorded this trench. According to municipal records, it was filled the following day. The sleeve, whatever it was, whatever it connected to, whatever purpose it served, was buried under cobblestones and forgotten. Its existence survives only in this single, accidental image, captured by a photographer who was documenting something else entirely. This single visual detail supports neither the official narrative nor the Tartarian hypothesis conclusively. It simply exists, uncomfortable, unexplained, resistant to interpretation. A glimpse of something that should not have been there, preserved by chance in a photograph that no one thought to examine closely for over a century. The official story says these were gas lamps installed by Victorian engineers using period-appropriate technology to serve a straightforward municipal function. The physical evidence says they were something else, older, more complex, designed for purposes we no longer understand and connected to systems we can no longer trace. Whatever they were, we dismantled them before understanding their purpose. We filled in the trenches. We melted down the components. We lost the knowledge, if we ever had it. Across continents, identical signatures appeared in structures built decades apart in an age when such coordination should have been impossible. The Tartarian hypothesis offers one explanation, contested, speculative, unproven, but coherent. The official narrative offers none at all. It simply ignores the contradictions and proceeds as though they do not exist. The sealed chambers remained closed, the photographs never explained what was buried beneath them, and the lamps, those strange, impossible, meticulously engineered lamps, still stand at their appointed coordinates across Europe, marking a grid whose meaning we have forgotten, serving a function we can no longer name. The investigation ends where it began, with a photograph, a lamppost, a detail too small to dismiss and too precise to forget. The buried sleeve descends into darkness. The machining marks catch the light. And beneath the streets of a dozen cities, something waits, sealed, preserved, unexplained. No conclusion. Only the quiet recognition that something older lies beneath our cities, hidden under cast iron and cobblestones and official history. The Tartarian researchers may be wrong about the details, but they are asking the right questions, and the lamps, silent and patient, offer no answers, only evidence that the questions deserve to be asked.